What would you do if your own granddaughter looked you in the eye and told you that you were too old to be seen at her wedding? Would you swallow the insult quietly, letting it sink into your bones, or would you find the strength to prove her wrong? Those were the very words I heard from Lily, my only granddaughter, the girl I once cradled, the girl I thought I'd lost to distance but hoped to win back through love. Her words struck me harder than any illness or hardship I'd ever endured. "Grandma, you're too old to be at my wedding. People will stare. You don't belong there." I wish I could tell you it ended there, that I accepted her cruelty and retreated into silence. But no. Those words ignited something in me, something Lily never expected. I am Eleanor Parker, 71 years old, a widow, a mother who buried her only daughter, and a woman who stitched clothes late into the night for decades just to keep food on the table. I live alone in San Diego now, surrounded by memories, but far from forgotten. And this is the story of how my granddaughter tried to erase me from the most important day of her life, only for me to uncover a secret that turned her wedding into a battlefield of truth and deception. The first sting came not from her words, but from the invitation itself. It arrived on thick ivory paper, heavy in my hands as though it carried more than ink. It carried hope. For a moment, I let myself believe Lily wanted me there. My heart swelled when I saw her name in elegant script, alongside a young man I had never met, Adrian. I pressed that invitation to my chest, whispering a silent thank you to the daughter I had lost 5 years earlier. My Marie. She was Lily's mother, my pride, my only child. Losing her nearly destroyed me, but I told myself this wedding might be a chance to heal, a way to feel close to Marie again. I even chose a lavender dress, simple and graceful, the kind of garment I knew Marie would have smiled at. But that hope shattered with one phone call. Lily's voice was colder than I had ever heard. She said her fiancé's family was very traditional, that they were inviting important people. She hesitated, then cut me to the bone. "Grandma, you won't fit in. People will look at you strangely. I don't want to embarrass you, or myself." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Imagine raising a family, surviving heartbreak, working your fingers raw to provide, and then being told by your own flesh and blood that your age made you unworthy of standing by her side. I sat at my kitchen table long after the call ended, staring at that invitation as if it had turned into an insult written in gold ink. My chest ached, not just with sorrow, but with humiliation. I had weathered loss before, but never like this. To be told that the years I carried with pride, the wrinkles, the silver hair, the wisdom, were nothing but shame in my granddaughter's eyes. It hollowed me out in a way I cannot fully describe. For the first time, I truly felt old, not in body, but in spirit. The world had shifted forward, leaving me as a relic in the shadows. That lavender dress I had chosen so carefully suddenly looked like a fool's costume, mocking me from its hanger. But anger has a way of lighting fires even in weary bones. As I wiped my tears, a thought burned brighter than the pain. I will not let her silence me. I will not fade away just because she thinks I should. I reminded myself of the woman I had been, the seamstress who sewed through hunger and exhaustion, the mother who raised a daughter alone, the grandmother who still believed family was worth fighting for. So I made a vow that night. I would go to that wedding, not in lavender, but in strength. And when I arrived, I uncovered something that no one, least of all Lily, ever expected. A secret so heavy it nearly brought her perfect celebration crashing to the ground. So yes, Lily told me I was too old to belong at her wedding. She wanted me hidden away like some embarrassment, a reminder of a past she wished to erase. But life has taught me that shame only lasts as long as you allow it. I had spent decades bowing my head, swallowing my pain. This time, I chose to stand tall. What Lily didn't know was that her cruel words set events in motion that would expose secrets buried under polished smiles and diamond rings. Secrets that turned a celebration into chaos, and a granddaughter's betrayal into a grandmother's victory. Before I tell you how it all happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel unwanted, not because of what you did, but because of who you are, your age, your struggles, your past? If you have, then you already understand the weight I carried. Tell us in the comments if you've ever been treated as though you no longer mattered, and let me know where you're watching from. And if you want more stories that reveal the hidden strength of women who refuse to be silenced, make sure you subscribe and join our growing family here on Granny's Tales. Because when I walked into that wedding, wearing a scarlet dress stitched with my own hands, I wasn't just a grandmother crashing a celebration. I was walking straight into a storm of lies, and I was ready to face it. The invitation came on a warm afternoon, carried in the hands of the postman as though it were something precious. I sat alone in my San Diego home, the steady tick of the clock filling the silence, when I slit open the envelope. Inside lay a piece of cardstock, so fine it seemed to glow in the sunlight. My fingers lingered over the embossed letters, tracing my granddaughter's name as though touching it might bridge the distance that had grown between us. Lily Mae Parker. She was marrying someone named Adrian. I had never met him, but the sound of his name carried weight, formal, important, the sort of name that made me imagine expensive suits and carefully measured smiles. For a long while, I just stared at that invitation, my heart tightening with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Lily and I had never been close. She grew up far away, first in New York, later in Boston, while I remained rooted in California. Our meetings were rare, our phone calls fleeting. But after Marie, my only daughter, Lily's mother, passed away 5 years ago, I thought there might come a time when Lily and I could lean on each other. Losing Marie had left a canyon inside me, and Lily was the only family I had left. So when her wedding invitation landed on my table, it felt like an open door, a chance to step into her world again. My chest ached with longing, but this time it wasn't the pain of loss, it was the fragile joy of believing I hadn't been forgotten. I decided, almost instantly, that I would go. I chose a lavender dress, the shade Marie had always said brought warmth to my face. It wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant. I imagined walking into the ceremony quietly, offering a smile, and perhaps Lily would see me not as the old woman time had shaped, but as the grandmother who had once rocked her to sleep. For days, I let myself dream. I folded the dress carefully, set aside money for a ticket to Boston, and studied the invitation like it held a promise of reunion. My heart whispered, "This is where healing begins." But dreams have a way of breaking, sometimes faster than they form. The phone rang just days after the invitation arrived. Lily's number flashed across the screen. My pulse quickened. I thought she was calling to share her excitement, maybe even to ask if I needed help with travel arrangements. Instead, her voice carried no warmth. "Grandma," she said, clipped and impatient, "we need to talk about the wedding." I smiled, trying to push away the sharp edge in her tone. "Yes, darling. I received the invitation. It's beautiful. I'm so proud of you." She cut me off. "Listen, Adrian's family is very traditional. They're inviting important guests, people with high expectations. I've been thinking, it might be better if you didn't come." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. My breath stalled. "Not come? But, Lily, I'm your grandmother. Why wouldn't I?" She hesitated, but only briefly. "Because you're too old. People will stare. You won't fit in, and honestly, I don't want to feel embarrassed." Her words landed like blows. I gripped the receiver so tightly my knuckles whitened. The lavender dress flashed in my mind, suddenly reduced to a cruel joke. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of grief and disbelief swirling inside me. "So you're saying I don't belong at your wedding?" My voice was thin, almost foreign to my own ears. "It's not like that," she said quickly, her tone softening but hollow. "I'm just being practical. I'll come visit you soon, I promise." Promises. Empty syllables tossed like scraps to quiet the hurt. Before I could gather my thoughts, she ended the call, leaving me in a silence that pressed against my chest. I sat frozen, the phone still in my hand, my eyes fixed on the invitation that now mocked me from the table. All my life I had fought to prove my worth, to employers who underpaid me as a seamstress, to neighbors who whispered about the single mother down the street, to fate itself when it took Marie too soon. But never did I think I would need to prove myself to my own granddaughter. Tears stung my eyes, hot and unrelenting. For the first time, I felt truly discarded. Not because of my mistakes, not because of choices made long ago, but simply because of the years carved into my face. That night, I hung the lavender dress back in the closet. The fabric that once gave me hope now seemed frail, almost apologetic. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying Lily's words again and again. You're too old. You'll embarrass me. Grief gave way to anger. Slowly at first, like an ember flickering in ash, then stronger, hotter. I had survived too much to be erased by a careless sentence. I had held my daughter's hand through fevers, stitched dresses for strangers while my stomach growled with hunger, buried the love of my life, and endured the crushing silence of widowhood. And now I was supposed to accept being told I was nothing more than an embarrassment? No. The pain would not define me. The wrinkles on my face were not marks of shame but proof of survival. The years etched into my hands told stories of work, sacrifice, and endurance. If Lily could not see that, then I would show her. Not through words, but through presence. I whispered to myself that night over and over, I will go. I will not be pushed aside. I will stand tall, even if she wants me gone. I did not yet know what awaited me in Boston. I did not yet know that her cruel dismissal was only the first crack in a facade hiding secrets far darker than her words. But I knew one thing. This would not be the end of me. And let me ask you something. Have you ever been left out of a family gathering, not because you couldn't attend, but because someone decided you shouldn't? Have you ever been told you no longer belonged in the very circle you helped create? If so, then you already understand the weight of the betrayal I carried. That betrayal became my fuel. It was no longer just about attending a wedding. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to vanish quietly. And as the days passed, a new determination settled in my bones. The lavender dress remained in the closet, untouched. In its place, another idea began to form, one that would transform my pain into defiance. That was the beginning of my plan, though I did not yet know how far it would take me or what truths it would force into the light. The days that followed Lily's call passed in heavy silence. My small San Diego home felt emptier than ever, each room echoing with reminders of a family I no longer had. Morning coffee tasted bitter, my evening walks stretched on without joy, and the porch swing that once brought me comfort now creaked like a sad metronome. But amid that loneliness, something stubborn inside me refused to fade. I had lived too many years, fought too many battles, to let one cruel sentence erase my place in the world. The longer I replayed Lily's words, the more I realized I had two choices: sink into bitterness, or rise with defiance. I chose defiance. It began quietly. Instead of walking the same block I had traced for years, I rode the bus downtown. My joints protested, but my spirit felt lighter with each stop. I sat in the library for hours, surrounded by shelves of stories that reminded me of resilience. My eyes landed not just on books, but on the row of computers that hummed softly. I hadn't touched a keyboard in years, but I forced myself to learn. With patient clicks and clumsy keystrokes, I stepped into a new world. At first, I typed in simple things: Boston weather, directions, pictures of the city. But soon my search grew sharper. I looked up the wedding venue, Blackwood Manor, an estate outside Boston with ivy climbing its stone walls and gardens large enough to host hundreds of guests. Every image I found showed grandeur, wealth, and the kind of legacy families guarded fiercely. I studied the name Harrison, the family Adrian belonged to. Their history filled the screen: old money, generations of property, private collections of rare art. They weren't just wealthy, they were untouchable in the eyes of their city. But as I read deeper, I began to see shadows in the cracks of their reputation. A local news archive mentioned a string of art thefts plaguing wealthy families in the region. Priceless items had been swapped with convincing forgeries. Investigators suspected the work of skilled insiders, people who could pass as trustworthy before walking away with treasures. The Harrisons' name appeared more than once, sometimes linked to exhibitions, other times to whispered rumors about pieces vanishing from their collection. My stomach tightened. Was this just coincidence, or was there more beneath Adrian's polished exterior? Why had Lily been so evasive when she spoke of him? She had called his family traditional, but that word suddenly felt like a disguise. I dug further, scrolling through online forums where neighbors gossiped under fake usernames. One post caught my eye. A woman complained about a delivery van parked near the Harrison estate for days, the kind of detail most would overlook. But my instinct, honed through years of survival, told me details like that meant something. The more I read, the less I believed Lily's excuse for cutting me out had anything to do with age. It wasn't about my wrinkles or gray hair. She had something to hide, and I was becoming convinced it had everything to do with the man she was about to marry. But before suspicion, there was dignity to reclaim. One afternoon, I opened the door to a room I hadn't entered since Marie's death. My sewing room. Dust coated the shelves, and my old Singer machine sat in the corner like a relic of another life. I ran my fingers over its frame, remembering the nights I had bent over it, stitching gowns for strangers so my daughter could have shoes for school. That machine had been my lifeline, and now it would be my weapon. I decided not to wear the lavender dress. Lavender was soft, hopeful, timid. It belonged to a grandmother begging for acceptance. No, I needed something that spoke of strength. From the closet, I pulled out a bolt of scarlet silk I had saved for years. It had been too bold, too daring for the orders I once took. But for me, it was perfect. Every stitch I sewed into that dress carried my defiance. The hum of the machine filled the room like a heartbeat, steady and strong. Night after night, I pieced it together. The fitted bodice, the flowing skirt, the sharp lines that announced, I am still here. I am not to be dismissed. By the time it was finished, the scarlet dress was more than fabric. It was armor. Still, armor alone would not be enough. If I was going to Boston, I needed to know what I was walking into. So I returned to the library computers, more determined than ever. I searched not only for Adrian and the Harrison family, but also for the Blackwood Manor itself. Hidden among the historical notes was a detail that made my pulse quicken. The manor had once served as a stop along the Underground Railroad. Its foundations contained tunnels and hidden passages, some sealed, others whispered to remain. That fact lodged itself firmly in my mind. Why would a wealthy family so obsessed with antiques host a massive wedding in a place with secret spaces, unless those spaces had value? Piece by piece, a picture formed. Adrian was not just a suitor. He was part of something larger, a man tied to a family whose fortune and secrecy stretched back centuries. Whether Lily was complicit or a victim, I could not yet tell. But I knew this, her words about me being too old were more than cruelty. They were a diversion. She wanted me far away from Boston, not because I would embarrass her, but because she feared what I might discover if I came. That realization hardened my resolve. I booked a flight, quietly, without telling a soul. I packed my scarlet dress, folded carefully between layers of tissue, and slipped it into my suitcase. The lavender dress stayed behind, hanging like a ghost of the woman I refused to be. As I zipped my bag, I whispered to myself, I may be old in her eyes, but I am not blind. I see what she is trying to hide, and I will find out why. Now, let me pause and ask you, do you believe courage and dignity have an age limit? Or do you, like me, believe they burn brighter the longer we live? If you do, give this video a like. It tells me you understand that strength doesn't fade with time. Because for me, the scarlet dress was more than fabric, and the flight to Boston was more than a trip. It was the beginning of a truth Lily never intended me to uncover. The morning of my departure arrived with a heavy sky, the kind that makes the air feel thick with expectation. I clutched my small suitcase, the scarlet dress folded carefully inside, and stepped into the airport. My reflection in the glass doors startled me for a moment. Gray hair pinned neatly, face lined with years, but eyes steady with resolve. The flight from San Diego to Boston felt longer than it was. Every mile carried me closer to Lily, closer to the truth she wanted hidden. I pressed my forehead against the airplane window, staring at the vast landscape below. My chest tightened with worry about what I might uncover, about whether my granddaughter was in danger, or worse, complicit. Still, fear did not outweigh determination. When the plane landed, Boston greeted me with cool autumn air. Leaves danced across sidewalks in shades of gold and rust. I hailed a cab and rode past brick houses, tall steeples, and narrow streets that felt far older than anything back home. There was history in the air, but also a sense of guarded secrets. My modest hotel sat just a few miles from Blackwood Manor. It was nothing like the grandeur of Lily's venue. Plain walls, creaky floors, the smell of old carpet. But it suited me fine. I wasn't there for luxury. I was there for answers. That evening, I rented a small economy car. Next to the sleek black sedans and polished SUVs circling Boston's wealthy districts, it looked almost comical. But that little car gave me freedom. I drove past the entrance of Blackwood Manor more times than I can count, memorizing every detail. The gates were tall, the driveway long, and the estate itself seemed to loom with a quiet kind of authority. In the days leading up to the wedding, I watched the manor carefully. Caterers bustled in and out, their vans loaded with trays and linens. Florists carried arrangements so extravagant they seemed almost too heavy for their arms. Delivery trucks rolled through the gates one after another, each bearing logos of companies I had never heard of. To anyone else, it would look like preparation for an extravagant celebration. To me, it looked like movement carefully disguised as routine. On the second day, I noticed something that made my breath hitch. A large truck marked Guthrie and Sons Antiques pulled up to the manor. I remembered that name from the online forum where a neighbor had complained about it lingering suspiciously near the Harrison estate. Two men emerged, carrying what appeared to be a grandfather clock, ornate, heavy, the kind of item that belonged in a collection, not in a delivery van days before a wedding. They didn't look hurried. They looked practiced. Their faces were expressionless, their movements careful, as though they were not delivering but replacing. The memory of that article about stolen antiques returned to me with force. Could it be that the Harrisons, or perhaps Adrian himself, were involved in such a scheme? I circled the block, heart pounding. Each time I passed the manor, I saw more details I hadn't noticed before. Certain crates moved inside quickly and discreetly, men in plain clothes carrying items under heavy cloth covers, even late-night activity that didn't fit the picture of ordinary wedding preparations. It was then the realization struck me with a clarity that left me trembling. This wedding might not be a celebration at all. It might be a cover. An alibi crafted so no one would question the comings and goings, so no one would think twice about valuable antiques being moved in broad daylight. The thought chilled me, but it also sharpened my focus. If Adrian and his family were using this event to disguise a grand theft, then Lily was standing on dangerous ground. Whether she was complicit or manipulated, she was tied to something that could ruin her life. I wrestled with fear that night in my hotel room. The hum of the heater filled the silence as I sat on the bed, staring at my scarlet dress hanging from the closet door. Fear whispered that I was an old woman far from home, poking into business that could get me hurt. But another voice, stubborn, familiar, rose louder. I had not come this far to retreat. Every scar I bore from life told me that dignity is not handed to you. You must claim it, even when your knees ache and your hands tremble. If Lily thought age was a weakness, she would learn the truth. On the third evening, I parked farther from the manor and walked part of the way, keeping to the shadows of trees lining the estate. Through the open gates, I glimpsed Lily herself, standing near Adrian. She looked beautiful, but her smile was strained, her movements restless. She wasn't the radiant bride I expected. She looked nervous. I froze, watching from a distance. She clutched Adrian's arm, and he leaned down to whisper something. She nodded quickly, too quickly, as though agreeing out of fear rather than love. My heart twisted. I wanted to rush in to call her name, but I stayed still. To confront her too soon might ruin any chance of finding the truth. The days crept closer to the wedding, and my suspicion hardened into conviction. This was not about me being too old, not about appearances or embarrassment. I had been pushed aside because Lily knew I would notice things others ignored. She wanted me far away, not because of shame, but because she feared my eyes would uncover the truth. That knowledge lit a fire under my resolve. I would not stay hidden in a hotel while she walked into danger. If the Harrisons were planning something, if Adrian was not the man he claimed to be, then I needed to be there when the truth broke open. Still, I was afraid. My heart raced each time I thought of stepping onto that estate uninvited. My body was no longer strong as it once had been. But courage does not vanish with age. It only takes a different form. That night, I laid the scarlet dress across the bed. I ran my fingers over the smooth fabric, feeling the strength it represented. It was not just clothing. It was my statement to Lily, to Adrian, to everyone who thought years could silence me. The closer the wedding drew, the less it felt like a family gathering, and the more it resembled a storm waiting to break. Now let me ask you, would you risk humiliation and danger just to uncover the truth, even if it meant standing alone against those who wanted you silenced? Because that is exactly what I chose to do. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, as if the city itself were celebrating. I rose before sunrise in my modest hotel, nerves buzzing like an electric current through my veins. I stood before the mirror and fastened the scarlet dress I had stitched with my own hands. The fabric hugged my shoulders, the color bold against my pale skin. It wasn't the lavender softness I had once chosen. It was fire, the kind no one could ignore. I pinned my silver hair neatly, applied a touch of powder to hide the shadows beneath my eyes, and slipped on black shoes polished to a quiet shine. As I looked at my reflection, I whispered, "You belong. You always have." By mid-morning, I was in my little rented car, parked just beyond the gates of Blackwood Manor. Guests in designer clothes streamed toward the main entrance, laughter and chatter spilling into the air. Security guards in crisp uniforms checked names against a gleaming list, their postures sharp and watchful. I knew I would never make it through the front. But I hadn't come all this way without a plan. Days earlier, I had spotted a side gate used by staff, caterers and cleaners who moved swiftly in and out, rarely questioned. I waited until the ceremony began, until the music floated over the gardens and the crowd turned its attention to Lily walking down the aisle. Then I slipped from my car and walked with purpose toward the service entrance. An older woman in a red dress might draw attention in another setting, but here, with staff rushing and guests distracted, I was invisible. One guard glanced my way, but I carried myself with the air of someone who belonged, and he dismissed me without a word. Inside, the manor's halls stretched wide, lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow me. The murmur of vows carried faintly through the walls. My pulse quickened as I moved deeper, searching for the room that had tugged at my instincts since the moment I read about the estate, the library. When I pushed the door open, the sight stole my breath. Oak-paneled walls soared high, shelves groaning with leather-bound volumes. In the center, standing proud against the far wall, was a grandfather clock. Its polished frame gleamed under the chandelier, its brass pendulum swinging with steady rhythm. I stepped closer, narrowing my eyes. Something felt wrong. The finish lacked the deep richness I had expected. The wood was smooth but lifeless, as though it had never aged. I remembered the truck I had seen days earlier, the men carrying a clock just like this. The realization hit me with force. This wasn't the original. It was a replica, carefully crafted to fool a casual glance. My hand hovered over its surface, trembling not from age but from fury. Lily hadn't wanted me here because she knew I would notice. She had tried to keep me away, not to spare me embarrassment, but to shield me from this truth. "Grandma!" The voice behind me froze me in place. I turned slowly. Lily stood in the doorway, her wedding dress flowing like a river of white satin. Her face, once so radiant in my memories, was pale with shock and anger. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, stepping inside. "I told you not to come. How did you even get in?" I opened my mouth, but another voice cut across the room, deep and sharp. "Who is this?" Adrian entered, tall in his black tuxedo, eyes glinting with disdain. He placed a hand on Lily's arm, though it looked less like affection and more like ownership. "My grandmother," Lily said bitterly, her voice dripping with frustration. "The one I told you about. The one who's too old to be at my wedding." Adrian's mouth curled into a smile that chilled me. "Well, isn't this something?" The unwanted guest decides to crash the party. He took a slow step toward me, his gaze hard. "Tell me, old woman, what did you hope to accomplish by sneaking in here? Did you think you'd blend in with the crowd? You don't belong in this world." I straightened my spine, refusing to shrink beneath his words. "I belong wherever truth is being hidden," I said quietly, my voice steady. His smile faltered for just a moment, and that gave me courage. I turned my eyes on Lily, holding her gaze. "This clock is not real, Lily. I saw the original carried out days ago. They replaced it with this imitation. This entire wedding, it's not just about vows and rings. It's a cover for theft, isn't it? Lily flinched, her eyes darting to Adrian, then back to me. You don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, but her voice cracked. Oh, but I do, I replied. I spent nights researching this family. The Harrisons are not just wealthy. They are known for their art and antiques. And for every piece that goes missing, there's always some distraction, some grand event that draws attention elsewhere. What better alibi than a wedding with hundreds of witnesses? Adrian's expression hardened. His charming mask slipped, revealing the steel beneath. You're meddling in things you can't possibly understand. Maybe, I admitted, but I understand this much. My granddaughter isn't standing beside you out of love. She's standing here because she's trapped. Lily's lips parted, her eyes filling with a fear she couldn't hide. She shook her head weakly, but her silence spoke louder than words. I stepped closer, ignoring the tremor in my legs. You told me not to come because you knew I would see it. You thought if you hurt me deeply enough, I'd stay away. But here I am. And I see everything. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hand clamping more firmly on Lily's arm. She winced but didn't pull away. He turned his glare on me. Do you know what happens to people who stick their noses where they don't belong? I met his threat with calm I didn't feel. Do you know what happens to men who underestimate women like me? For a moment, the room was thick with tension, 3 figures locked in a silent battle. Adrian with his grip of control, Lily with her silent plea for release, and me, an old woman in scarlet, uninvited but unbroken. I could not yet prove the theft. I could not yet expose Adrian's full scheme, but I had cracked the first layer of his illusion, and I could see in his eyes that he knew it. And Lily, my granddaughter, stood between us, caught in the net of his lies, her face betraying the truth she was too afraid to speak. The wedding outside continued with music and laughter, but inside the library, the celebration had already shifted into something else entirely, a confrontation neither Adrian nor Lily had planned for. Adrian's grip on Lily's arm tightened as though he feared she might slip away if he let go. His eyes bored into me, sharp and venomous. You've said enough, he growled. You've seen too much. Walk out that door, old woman, and maybe I'll forget you ever stepped foot in this house. But his threat didn't shake me. I had faced hunger, heartbreak, and loss far greater than the menace of a man in a tuxedo. I took a breath and let my voice steady. No, Adrian. I won't walk away. Not when I know the truth. And not when my granddaughter's life is entangled in it. Lily's lips trembled. Her eyes darted between us, wide with fear. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as though words stuck in her throat. Lily, I said softly, my gaze fixed on hers, you didn't cut me out of this wedding because of embarrassment. You did it because you were trying to protect me. You knew that if I came, I would notice things you couldn't explain. And you were terrified that if I saw too much, Adrian would turn on me. Her eyes welled with tears and she whispered, Grandma, I didn't want you hurt. Adrian snapped his head toward her, fury flashing across his face. Don't start, Lily. But it was too late. The silence between us cracked. I squared my shoulders and spoke with the authority of every hardship I had endured. This marriage isn't about love. It's a scheme. Adrian, you and your family built a reputation around antiques, but that reputation hides theft. You don't just collect, you replace. You bring in trucks, pretend they're for restoration, and switch priceless pieces for fakes. This clock right here is one of them. Adrian's jaw clenched. He released Lily's arm and stepped closer to me. You're playing a dangerous game. You have no proof. I held his gaze. I don't need proof tonight. I only need enough to raise suspicion. And I have more than that. I know about the tunnels under this estate. They were once used to hide people seeking freedom. Now you're using them to move stolen treasures without a trace. For the first time, his expression faltered. His eyes flicked, just for a second, toward the fireplace behind him. That was all I needed to know I was right. Lily gasped. Tunnels? Is that true? Adrian turned on her, his tone dripping with venom. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't listen to her. She's nothing but a bitter old woman grasping at fantasies. I stepped closer, my scarlet dress swaying with each determined stride. No, Adrian. I'm not grasping. I was raised by a man who knew the value of secrets. My father, long before he disappeared from our lives, worked in intelligence during the war. He taught me how to read people, how to notice the smallest detail others miss. You thought I was just a frail grandmother, but I've been trained by a lifetime of hardship and bloodlines stronger than you'll ever understand. Adrian sneered. A story. That's all it is. No one will believe you. I let a thin smile cross my lips. Maybe not. But they'll believe the police. You see, before I even stepped on that plane in San Diego, I made a call. I told them about the thefts, the suspicious activity, the trucks I'd seen. I told them I was going to Boston, to Blackwood Manor, and that if they wanted their case to crack open, they'd better be here today. Adrian's face drained of color. The confidence he wore like armor faltered. He took a step back, his hands curling into fists. Lily covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Her body shook as tears spilled down her cheeks. Grandma, you called the police? Yes, I said firmly. Because I knew what I was walking into. I couldn't let this day be just about humiliation. I had to turn it into justice. Adrian let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. You clever witch. You think you've ruined me? Do you have any idea who I am, who my family is? We're untouchable. Not anymore, I replied. Because the moment the sirens reach these gates, every guest at this wedding will see the truth. And your perfect alibi will crumble. Lily looked at him then, truly looked, as though seeing him for the first time. Her voice cracked as she whispered, You promised me, Adrian. You said this was the last time, that we'd be free after this. His head snapped toward her. I promised you nothing but survival. Don't delude yourself. She recoiled, horror etched across her face. The last traces of loyalty drained from her eyes, replaced with something else, shame, regret, and a desperate longing for escape. I reached for her hand. Lily, listen to me. You're not the villain here. You're a victim, caught in his web. But you still have a choice. Stand with me, or let him drag you down with him. Her hand shook, but she didn't pull away. Adrian snarled, his mask shattered. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? Just then, faint at first but growing louder, the wail of sirens pierced the air. The sound seeped through the walls of Blackwood Manor like a promise of reckoning. Adrian's eyes widened. He turned toward the window, his chest rising and falling with frantic breaths. The color drained from Lily's face, but in her eyes I saw something new, relief. Adrian spun back toward me, his fury boiling over. You did this, he roared. Yes, I answered calmly. I did. Because courage doesn't retire with age. It sharpens. We stood locked in silence, the weight of everything crashing down around us. In that moment, Adrian wasn't a wealthy groom, Lily wasn't a radiant bride, and I wasn't a discarded grandmother. We were three people standing at the edge of a reckoning. The pounding on the manor doors echoed through the halls. Adrian's composure shattered, his movements restless, his eyes darting toward the hidden fireplace that concealed his escape route. He wanted to run, but the net was already closing. I squeezed Lily's hand and whispered, It's over. She looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Grandma. For everything I said, for pushing you away. I thought I was protecting you. You were, I said softly. But you forgot. I've spent my whole life protecting others. You never needed to protect me. You just needed to trust me. Adrian's voice, low and broken, muttered curses as he realized the walls were closing in. The sound of heavy boots filled the hall, followed by sharp voices calling out commands. The door to the library burst open, and uniformed officers flooded the room. Adrian raised his hands in reluctant surrender, his perfect facade crumbling with each second. I held my head high, not as an intruder, not as an embarrassment, but as a woman who had refused to be silenced. Now let me ask you, would you have had the courage to stand in that room, to face a man like Adrian and call down justice, even when everyone told you to stay away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how you would have stood your ground. Because at that moment, in my scarlet dress and steady voice, I proved that dignity has no expiration date. The library was no longer silent. The pounding of boots echoed down the hallway, sharp commands cut through the air, and the heavy sound of handcuffs clicking into place followed seconds later. Adrian Harrison, who had stood so tall and untouchable, was reduced to a figure of defeat, his shoulders slumped as officers led him away. The smile he had once worn with ease was gone, replaced with the pale mask of a man cornered by truth. Lily collapsed into a chair, her wedding gown spilling around her like a pool of white satin stained with sorrow. She pressed her trembling hands to her face, and for the first time since I arrived in Boston, she looked not like a bride, but like the little girl I remembered, fragile, frightened, and lost. "Grandma," her voice cracked as she lowered her hands, tears streaking her cheeks. "I am so sorry. For everything I said. For pushing you away. For making you feel like you didn't matter. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I was just hiding the truth." I walked to her slowly, my knees aching with each step, yet my spirit strong. I placed my hand on her shoulder and said, "Lily, you don't have to apologize for being afraid. You were caught in a storm you didn't know how to escape. But you must remember this. Love doesn't cast people aside. It pulls them closer. You forgot that when you told me I was too old. But today, we both remembered." She gripped my hand, her sobs shaking her body. "I thought Adrian would give me freedom. He promised me a life without fear, but he only built a cage, and I dragged you into it. I hurt you." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You didn't hurt me, my dear. Words can wound, but forgiveness is stronger. I forgave you the moment I saw the fear in your eyes." Around us, the sounds of order replacing chaos filled the manor. Guests murmuring in confusion, officers securing evidence, and the steady rustle of uniforms moving through the halls. But in that library, for a brief moment, it was just the two of us, grandmother and granddaughter, rediscovering the bond we had nearly lost. I eased myself into the chair beside her, smoothing the folds of my scarlet dress. She looked at it, then back at me, her tear-streaked face softening. "You look beautiful, Grandma. I said you didn't belong, but you were the only one who truly belonged here today. You saw the truth when no one else could." I smiled faintly. This dress was never about beauty. It was about defiance. It was my way of telling the world I wouldn't fade into the background. Every stitch is a reminder that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. I wore it to show you, and myself, that age doesn't erase strength. It sharpens it. Her fingers brushed the fabric gently, as though touching it might absorb some of the strength it represented. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," I said softly. "It's about healing. And we both need that." The door creaked open, and an officer stepped inside. "Ma'am, we'll need you and your granddaughter to give statements. But I want to say, without you, we wouldn't have known when to act. Your call set all of this in motion." I nodded, gratitude swelling in my chest. I hadn't needed recognition, but his words felt like confirmation that the battles of my life still mattered, that I wasn't just a bystander in the world around me. When the officer left, Lily turned to me, her eyes wide with wonder. "You called them before you even came here? You planned this?" "Yes," I said. Because I knew this wasn't just about humiliation. It was about danger. I couldn't risk standing by while you walked into ruin. I had to be here, not as a guest, but as your protector. Even if you didn't want me." Her chin quivered and she whispered, "I did want you. I just didn't know how to admit it." I squeezed her hand. "Now you do. And that's all that matters." As the hours passed, the manor emptied of guests, their laughter replaced by uneasy whispers. The wedding that was meant to be a celebration became a spectacle of shame for the Harrison name. But for me, it was something else entirely. It was a day of redemption. When Lily and I finally stepped out into the cool evening air, the scarlet dress billowed gently in the breeze. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but I walked forward with my head high, Lily's hand clasped tightly in mine. For once, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like a woman who had claimed her place, not just in her family, but in her own story. Back at the hotel, Lily sat across from me, her gown now wrinkled, her eyes swollen from tears. She reached across the table, her voice steadier than before. Grandma, I don't know how to thank you. Live better, I replied simply. Choose people who honor you, not use you. Remember that strength isn't measured in youth, but in courage. And never again believe that anyone you love is too old, too weak, or too forgotten to stand by your side. She nodded slowly, absorbing each word as though it were a lifeline. That night, as I hung my scarlet dress carefully in the closet of my hotel room, I realized it had become more than fabric. It had become a symbol of everything I had fought for: dignity, defiance, love, and truth. It carried the weight of every night I had sown through hunger, every tear I had shed for the daughter I lost, every cruel word Lily had spoken, and every ounce of strength I had reclaimed. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the quiet settle around me, and whispered a prayer of gratitude for survival, for reconciliation, and for the chance to remind the world and myself that worth does not fade with years. And now, to you watching this story unfold, I ask, what lesson do you take from it? Do you see the strength that can rise even when the world tries to silence you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's remind each other that courage has no age. If you want to hear more stories of women who refused to be erased, women who turned betrayal into triumph, subscribe to Granny's Tales. Join us so together we can keep these lessons alive, not just as entertainment, but as reminders of what it means to live with dignity. Because this story isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong, and who chose to stand tall anyway. As I sat quietly in my hotel room that night, the events of the day played over in my mind like a film I could hardly believe I had lived. The scarlet dress still hung near the window, its bold color glowing faintly in the lamplight, a silent reminder of the stand I had taken. I thought of the words Lily had once used to wound me: "You're too old to be at my wedding." Words that pierced my heart and nearly convinced me that the years behind me outweighed the value I still carried. Yet here I was, not diminished, but renewed. That day had taught me something I already knew deep down but had momentarily forgotten: age is not weakness. Age is strength. Every line on my face, every ache in my bones, carries the story of battles endured and survived. Age sharpens instincts, tempers pride, and gives courage a depth that youth cannot yet understand. I also realized something about family. Bonds can fracture, sometimes with sharp words, sometimes with silence that stretches too long. Betrayal can cut deeper when it comes from those closest to us. Yet, even in the middle of heartbreak, there is room for healing. Lily's apology did not erase the pain, but it opened the door to something greater: renewed trust. Family can be broken, yes, but it can also be mended in the most unexpected ways. And courage, it does not fade with years. It grows. It grows in quiet moments when you keep going despite loneliness. It grows when you speak truth even when your voice shakes. It grows when you refuse to let others decide your worth. That day, courage carried me through a door I was never meant to enter, into a library where secrets hid behind polished wood, and into the heart of a confrontation that could have ended in silence. Instead, it ended in truth. I share this not because I want praise, but because I know there are those listening who have been told they are too old, too weak, or too forgotten. To you I say, those words are lies. You have survived storms that others could not. Your years are not a burden. They are proof of endurance. Do not let anyone convince you that your story is finished simply because of the number written on your birth certificate. The scarlet dress was my reminder, stitched with trembling hands but worn with steady pride. For me, it will always represent defiance against invisibility. It will always remind me that even when family falters, strength remains. To you watching, I ask, what lesson do you take from this? Did you see yourself in my story? Have you ever felt discarded, only to find your strength when it mattered most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let your story be heard, because every voice adds to the chorus of resilience. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity is not bound by age, then subscribe to Granny's Tales. Together, we can carry these lessons forward. Stories of betrayal turned to justice, of humiliation turned to pride, of silence turned to strength. Because in the end, this story is not only mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever stood tall when told to sit down, who has spoken when told to stay quiet, who has chosen courage when fear seemed easier. And so, what began as a day of humiliation ended as the day I reclaimed not just my dignity, but my family.